Heather. Can you hear me? Can you hear me okay, Heather?
Hey, Alex, I just can't hear you.
Okay, you can't hear, okay. 1 second. All right.
There we go.
You can hear me now. Okay,
yeah.
Good.
How are you?
I'm well, thanks. How are you, Heather?
I'm good, thanks.
Good.
It's nice to meet you.
Yeah, it's nice to meet you too. That networking thing was brilliant. Oh my God.
It was really cool.
Yeah, I got to meet some of your other fellow student athletes, so it was really nice to meet some of those people.
Yeah, definitely. It's really cool online how all that worked out.
Right? This platform, I'm telling you, this is getting my recommendation for this conference. So
yeah, definitely.
So I just wanted to check with sharing my window here because I just want to make sure it works. So when I'm presenting, I won't be able to see. I know I won't be able to see any of you, but I also won't be able to see myself. It's just my presentation.
Okay, I think they can still see us at the bottom and then the presentation as well.
Right. Okay. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't doing something wrong because I am not great all the time with stuff like this. So, okay. So if I then go here and I share, can you see this now?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So I know I was supposed to start with this slide so that you can introduce me, I think.
Yeah. I'll just go through a few introductions first and then I'll hand it over.
Nice. Okay. And I also know that it said about like 15 minutes and then taking a break and then another 15 minutes. I've done my best to follow that guideline. And
okay, perfect.
I should be on point today, but in case I'm not, I might need your help with the time.
All right, perfect. Sounds good.
All right. Ready when you are, Heather.
All right, sounds good. We'll give it maybe a minute or so.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah, I see it's
all right, perfect.
I'm so eager. I'm so I'm so jazzed up about the conversations that have already happened so far. So.
Yeah, they've been incredible.
Yeah, that last panel was actually kind of a nice segue into some of what I'm going to talk about. So yeah. And sorry, Heather, tell me a little bit about you. What sport do you play? What are you studying?
I'm on the soccer team, actually. I'm just transitioning to coaching myself.
Yay! I'm so happy to hear. That's awesome.
That's a good panel or breakout session for me to be a part of.
Yeah. Well, hopefully you have some questions for me.
Yeah, definitely I do. Perfect. Here, we can get started now then.
All right.
I just have a bit of an introduction. So welcome to our first speaker session of the afternoon. My name's Heather Raymond, and I'm a member of the Western Mustangs soccer team. Speakers will take a break at 15 minutes to answer a few questions and then return to their presentation, and we'll conclude with a few more questions. I encourage the use of the chat function to generate conversations and questions. This is how you will communicate. Only presentators and moderators will have access to the audio-visual components. And please use the chat function, ensuring session chat is selected to communicate and ask questions throughout the sessions. It is a great pleasure to welcome you all to Athlete Identity and Transitioning in Sport, presented by Alexandra Cron. Alex was a student athlete in the sport of volleyball at the University of Winnipeg. In her final year there, she published her first paper titled Police Record Checks, Athlete Protection or Political Smokescreen. This sparked her interest in exploring motivations to coach and better understanding why coaches do what they do. She herself has transitioned into an assistant coaching position at the University of Toronto and is also pursuing her PhD focused on exploring the work and professionalization of university sport coaches. Alex is passionate about advancing and empowering women in sport and leadership, and she is dedicated to challenging the systems and structures that impede women in sport coaching. With us here today, Alix will talk about athlete identity and transitioning in sport. And in sharing her insights, we will learn about how one's personal identity as an athlete can be maintained by transitioning to another sport role. We are so fortunate to welcome Alexandra Cron. Alix, you can take it away.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Heather, for that introduction. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alix Krahn. I go by the pronouns she, her, and hers, and I'm so excited to be here today. It has been a fantastic day listening to all the presenters and the panelists as well. Today, I'm going to be talking to you about a really important topic that I feel like, quite frankly, is not discussed enough. So before I begin, I would like to take some time to thank the folks at Western, including Heather, for putting on this conference and for the invitation to speak. It is truly an honor to be amongst the panelists and presenters today. Whenever I get a chance to be a presenter, I like to dedicate my platform to a cause or to an organization that I'm invested in. So today, I want to shout out support for Project Pastels, a non-for-profit organization that is spearheaded by one of volleyball's own, Atara Karupu. Through Project Pastels, Atara is using her platform right now to make sport a better space for BIPOC athletes. So please give Project Pastels a follow, and thank you so much, Atara, for the important work that you are doing. Conferences like this one are critically important as sport remains to be contested and fraught terrain for many, including women. On that note, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the land that I am currently occupying. And while I do, I encourage all of you to take a moment and reflect on how the land that you occupy has served you. Today, I'm tuning in from the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. The area known as Tekaronto has been caretaken by the Anishinaabe Nation, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Huron-Wendat. It is now home to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis communities. I acknowledge the current treaty holders, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory is subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably care and share for the Great Lakes region. So what did I mean when I said that sport remains to be contested and fraught terrain for many, including women? Well, by that, I'm referring to the low participation rates for girls in sport. What we know about girls in sport is that roughly 62% of girls are not participating in sport, that their participation across their lifetime will decrease. And we know that their dropout from sport is also tied to their ethnicity, their ability, and their sexual orientation. Not only am I referring to the current status of girls in sport, but I'm also referring to the systemic barriers that exist for women in sport. So what you are seeing here on the right is last week's picture comparing the men's and women's training facilities for the NCAA March Madness tournament. And on your left, you're seeing a picture from an article of a German football coach or soccer coach who was punished recently for unsportsmanlike conduct. And his punishment was to coach the women's team. I rest my case. These conversations are critically important. So thank you all for bearing with me as I start my presentation today with a bit of a vent. It's been weighing heavily on me this week, and I needed to get that off my chest before we started talking. So today's topic, athlete identity and transitioning in sport. Wow, this is a big topic. And as I said at the start of this conversation, it's a topic that hasn't been discussed enough, and one that's going to require follow-up past today's discussion. I want to be honest with you in my struggle for preparing for today. I have had so many thoughts enter my brain over the last little while, including what stories I should share. What would I have wanted to hear when I was transitioning in sport? What key messages will resonate with all of you today? And how am I going to do this in a pretty short amount of time? One thing that I would like to make clear at the outset is that my story and the experiences that I will share today is one story and are one set of experiences. And I do not claim this experience to be the same for all. So I'm going to invite you right now and throughout this conversation to reflect on your own experiences and stories, to find points of connection with the presentation today and points of disconnection, and to use this as a means to continue your own quest for answers past today. With that acknowledged, my best hope for today's conversation is to communicate to you all that your involvement in sport does not need to end when your athletic career does. So the first thing that I want to call to your attention today is the emphasis that we place on being an athlete when we are one. There may be people on this call today who are still athletes like Heather. And some of you might be like me, who have since moved on from competing in the sporting environment. But when we're an athlete, the focus and the emphasis on being an athlete has a tendency to trump all other parts of our identity. And it is that way for a variety of different reasons. So first, I think it's important to acknowledge just how important it is for us at times to focus on what I'm going to call our athlete-ness. For example, when we're competing, when we're practicing, when we're training our bodies, it is really helpful for us to be in that athlete zone. Second, for many of us, it's in fact what we're doing with most of our time, and it's what we enjoy doing. And while there is absolutely nothing wrong with that, there is a downside to overemphasizing that athlete part of our identity. Specifically, we can lose sight of who we are at times. We can become overly obsessed with sport and performance in a way that's not healthy. We can become overly focused on developing that one part of us to the point that we forget that we are so much more than just an athlete. And for those of us who still maybe are or were student athletes, sometimes we can forget altogether that we're students. Last night, I took in a conversation about a new book called Proud to Play, Canadian LGBTQ2S+ athletes who made history. I listened to two athletes talk about their experiences, and in addition to learning about how difficult it was for them to navigate sport with their closeted identities, they also shared about having their athlete identity completely consume them to the point of being so focused on results that they developed serious mental health effects. To share a personal anecdote, in my second year of university, I developed what most people might call an exercising disorder. I worked out in the morning, I had practice in the afternoon, and I worked out after practice. I did this because I thought it was what I needed to do to get bigger, faster, stronger. Those are buzzwords I'm sure some of us can relate to. When in fact, what I was really doing was depleting all of my energy, exposing myself to injury, and neglecting other parts of my life, like friendships and school. At the time, I very vividly remember getting extra praise for this extra work that I was putting in the gym. And it took another athlete from a different team who had had a similar experience saying to me, "Hey, I'm worried about you. I don't want to see you burn out and injure yourself like I did," for me to really realize that what was going on was unhealthy. I was so focused on my athlete identity and the praise that I was getting for being an athlete that I forgot to get some perspective. And that piece about perspective is something I'm going to return to. I want to make clear also that our overemphasis on being an athlete to the neglect of other parts of us is often unconscious and is supported by the system of sport that we're operating within. There is an overemphasis on performance on our current day version of sport. The media overemphasizes stories of successful teams and athletes, and our coaches, or the people who lead us through sport, are so focused on winning in order to keep their jobs that they can get caught overemphasizing results without necessarily getting to know us first as people. I want to make a point clear here because I study coaches. This is not a criticism of coaches. This is a criticism of the system that they exist within. So it's all about winning. And when you're an athlete, that means performing on court, on ice, on pitch, in pool, day in and day out. I offer this as a means to squelch any guilt or shame gremlins that might be entering your head. You emphasize being an athlete because that is what is expected of you. When I was working myself to the bone in the gym, it's because I thought that's what I needed to do in order to be better at my sport. I thought I needed to work harder, and if I did, I would get stronger and I would perform better. This was my first encounter with realizing that while hard work is externally praised by society and especially in sport, it is not the only thing that matters. I want to take a moment right now also to acknowledge the athlete panel, the second panel that happened today, which mentioned how they had to work very hard to support themselves. I think this is an important comment to highlight because my experience was a university athlete's career. It wasn't a professional athlete's career. And in Canada, the struggle for professional athletes is very real. In fact, many of our Olympic-bound athletes are living below the poverty line. So I do want to call attention to that. What I'm really hoping to do today is take time to remind you all that athlete is only one part of your identity. You are so much more than an athlete, and it is important for us all to develop other aspects of our identity as we transition in and through sport. For me, nobody emphasizes this better than Po from Kung Fu Panda. In the movie, Po is obsessed with the Furious Five: monkey, mantis, crane, viper, and tigress. And when he, by accident, becomes named the Dragon Warrior, he becomes overly focused on being like the Furious Five, instead of being what he is, a panda. This quote highlights some critical questions that are worth examining. Who are you? What are you good at? And what makes you you? So as you take some time right now to reflect on those questions, I want to share that when I was an athlete, I was never asked these questions. And I never took time to think through these things. Part of that was the demanding nature of being a student athlete. Part of that was the overemphasis on performance. Another part of that was my own insecurity and interest in what others thought of me. And a really big piece for me was that I wanted my coach at the time to accept me so bad that I was so focused on what she wanted me to be rather than what I wanted to be. So my intention with this slide today is to invite everyone taking part in this session to take some time, if you have not already, to think through these questions. Other important questions include, what do you care about? What's important to you? Or as we've heard other people say, what makes you tick? An example from my own story happened when I was in my 4th year of university. So this was to the end of my athletic career. Up until this point, I had taken a Bachelor of Science in Kinesiology route. Science was one of my strongest areas in high school, so I reasonably assumed that a career in physical sciences would be where I would find myself. But all of that changed when I took a 4th year elective in sport ethics. I quickly realized how much I enjoyed having hard conversations about ethical dilemmas in sport, which included power dynamics between coaches and athletes, coaching abuse and maltreatment, and other moral dimensions of sport. It was in this class that I had a professor tell me for the first time, "You're really good at writing. You really seem to enjoy participating in class discussion. Have you thought about graduate school or publishing your work?" I was so shocked. It was 4 years into my degree and no one had ever said this to me before. And I'll be honest, I immediately stood a little bit taller, felt a little bit better about myself, and a seed was planted that I would grow much later on in life. So I echo Eva's comments, I think from before, or Eva, apologies for the mispronunciation, about how she had Allison say to her, hey, you're really good at presenting. You know, you could kind of do this. And I can't say enough how crucial it is for professors and for allies, for mentors, for coaches to support us as we navigate the sports system. Admittedly, it has taken me time to realize what I care about. And just the other day on our Canada Summer Games coaches meeting, I shared that I'm most passionate about people, specifically being in community with people, about fighting for social change, and about learning. I absolutely love to learn. And I am very privileged to be able to live this every day as a coach and a researcher. And I share this story and these thoughts in order to highlight that what we care about isn't always immediately evident to us. It can take some time for us to develop our passions, and sometimes it can take someone calling them out for us to become aware of what they are. I'm hoping that in asking you these questions today, you can continue or you can start engaging in this process. So if I'm following protocol for today, we're roughly at about 15 minutes, and I'm supposed to take a break here now to see if there are any questions for me at this time.
Yes, great presentation so far. I have a few questions myself. So one thing you mentioned was how it's the demanding student athlete nature and how sometimes it's easy to get sucked into the athlete identity and how it's easy to fall into an unhealthy cycle of exercise or nutrition.
Yes.
And one question I had was what advice you have for someone who may fall into this athlete identity and maybe in an unhealthy cycle of exercise and nutrition and needs help reaching out or getting out of this mindset.
Yeah, thanks so much for the question, Heather. I think that there's a number of different things I could say here, and just acknowledging that everyone's situation is unique. The thing that helped me the most, if I can just draw our attention back there, was actually a fellow student athlete saying, hey, are you okay? And eventually, I'm a bit worried about you. So if I was someone, you know, who is going through that right now, first off, I can't say that everyone would necessarily be that aware to see it, but I do think that there were comments made at different times where people were kind of like, are you okay? So first off, I would encourage you as teammates or people who might be surrounding folks who are going through navigating some difficult times to check in. And again, I use that word check in very intentionally to ask what's going on, to try and get more information, and to be prepared that that person might not be ready to talk to you about it. If the situation is advanced and there is the situation is a bit out of control, then I do want to say that getting professional help is certainly necessary. I never got to that point, but there were athletes that were around me who got to that point. And I have a really good friend who went through this. And at one point, it was time for us to sit down and say, we need to get you some help. So the difficult thing in all of this is that people have agency and they can resist. But as fellow peers, keep your eyes open, check in with your friends. And if you realize the situation is getting out of control, you need to get some professional help. Bring in those support systems. And I don't know what the situation is like at different universities. I know where I coach, we have an embedded counselor and we have someone that we can refer athletes to. We also happen to have a nutritionist. So again, I'm aware that this is a very privileged situation. So we have a professional who's already connected to those athletes and working with them. So if you don't have a professional in that situation, go to your leaders, go to your people that you can trust, and ask them to get you the support that you need. I hope that answers your question, Heather.
Yes, it definitely does. One follow-up question from Caroline. What do you recommend to athletes in terms of talking to coaches or parents when they want to bring up these topics? So how do you start the conversation yourself?
Ooh, so when you say these topics, I just want to follow up on that. Do you mean having conversations about disordered eating or exercise, or transitioning out of sport?
I would believe both, either, anything. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks so much, Caroline, for your question. Yes, and it's a good one. How do you navigate these discussions? I think first and foremost, it's always helpful to know that it's going to be a bit tricky, no matter what kind of conversation you're having about, whether it's about transition or about personal things you're going through. It's going to be difficult. There's going to be emotion involved, and there's going to probably be, and when I say emotion involved, I think that's probably the biggest thing, right? When I think about my parents, my parents care so much about me, and my coaches at the time cared so much about me. So that's what I mean. They're sitting there and they're trying to do the best to help you. So that's where the emotion can kind of complicate things. And then it's about asking some really good questions. So if you need help from coaches, from parents, I would take time before entering in that conversation to come up with some really good questions that you require clarity around. When it comes to transitioning in sports, so if you are asking for support, or like, hey, I want to get involved in this, how do I do this? Going to your coach or going to your parent can help, but you can do it too. Go online, check out your university's website. I'm going to provide my email at the end of this conversation. Send me an email. Reach out to people who are already doing what you're maybe wanting to do in sport. I can honestly tell you, I don't think there's a single person here today who wouldn't be happy to receive an email from you. And the reality is, this is such a small population of us. There's so many of us out there. So that would be one tip. And again, if you're talking about the nutritional side of things, again, it can be really hard. But I want to say that if you are courageous, and if you realize that these people really are trying to help you, it will end in a good conversation. I hope that answered your question, Caroline. If you want to try again at the end to get me to retry that one again, I'd be happy to.
And maybe one more question before we go back to your presentation.
Yeah.
From Shannon, she said, in your presentation, you mentioned that you want to highlight that this isn't necessarily a coach issue, but a system issue. Yes. And in your research, what factors / phenomenon should we explore in a push towards understanding the system factors that need to be adjusted to mitigate some of the issues you were discussing?
All right, Shannon, thank you very much for that question. So just to clarify what I mean by that, when we get into sport again, and when we get into the area of performance, and it's about winning and all of that, like, again, you have to look around at what the culture of sport and the kinds of values that it engenders. And that performance piece is huge, right? So to use an example from my own research, I've been talking to coaches and athletic directors and people in multinational sport organizations, and unanimously throughout these interviews, it's very clear that the expectation is to win, that the expectation is to compete at a high level, at a high standard. And so what that does for coaches is that puts a lot of pressure on them to then achieve those results. But what we haven't done a really good job of understanding yet are much more of the economic aspects of coaching. So as it's clear in my title of my thesis, the coaching work, the labor relations, the economic pieces around that. One of our biggest issues in sport coaching is this notion of sort of boundaryless work, or very precarious work, where coaches are constantly doing work. In one of the previous sessions, I believe it was Vicky sharing about, her experience with her own daughter and what that was like. And again, your daughter is realizing these things in you. So again, that we've got a population of people who are overworked. So there is a lot of things that we can do to address this. And one of those things involves kind of recreating the expectations, I think, for coaches. I also haven't advanced this theory yet. I'm still early in my career, but coaching is a team sport. Coaching in and of itself should be a team sport. So how do we try to advocate for more full-time assistant positions? How do we get our head coaches more support in that way? And that's going to take an organizational shift. That's one example. I feel like I could stay here for a while, but I do appreciate the question, Shannon, and I'd be happy to expand more either at the end or in an email potentially with you. Love the question. Thank you.
Awesome answers. I'll hand it back over to you to continue your presentation.
Thank you. Okay, so why is all of this important? Well, there's a number of reasons why this is important, but in relation to the conversation today, it's because transition is always hard. Never mind in the middle of a global pandemic. So if you'll oblige me here for a moment, I do want to take time to acknowledge what is happening right now in sport. No one can deny the negative impact that COVID-19 has had on sport. And for some athletes, this has meant ending their careers. In fact, we're online today because of COVID, and this conference has been pushed back because of COVID. And I was just having this conversation 2 days ago with a good friend of mine, Tamara Tatham. And we were talking about the fact that we couldn't wrap our minds around having to end your career or head into retirement because of COVID. Can you imagine what that would feel like? And I'm not sure, maybe there are some people on this call today who have had that experience or who are going through that right now. Or maybe you know somebody who's going through that. And so my deepest sympathies to that person or to yourself. Perhaps this will be a conversation that will need to happen in future years. But back to what I was saying about transition is always hard. As an athlete, you have just spent the majority of your life and a lot of your time working on, again, what I called your athleteness. And then it comes to an end and you're left with 2 words. Now what? Perhaps the imagery of this chalkboard and the weight of those 2 words is a little heavy. Maybe it's a bit dramatic, but the point that I'm trying to make here is threefold. 1, most of us have spent much of our time focusing on our athletic identities and being in the moment that we haven't really thought through what comes next. And again, I point out that this is an issue related to the system. It is what is expected of us as athletes. 2, as an athlete, you have largely spent most of your life being corrected, getting feedback, and being told what to do. And then your career ends, and all of a sudden, you're in the driver's seat without those same voices you had before. This is a reminder to coaches to help your athletes build their inner voice. So when they leave your gym, they're not asking themselves, now what? And 3, that the very things we are praised for as female athletes competing in sport, so being big, taking up space, being aggressive, competitive, leading, and going for what we want, is not always accepted in everyday life. And so I want to echo what Shireen said in the last panel. You're going to be told no. Some of us, and often most of us, that is our experience. We're told no, especially if you're a strong woman who's calling out injustice. So it comes as no surprise that when we exit our athlete careers, we can end up feeling a little lost. Again, let's pause here to take a moment and consider what you have just come through. Whether you've had a long or short career in sport as an athlete, you've just spent the last however many hours, days, weeks, and potentially years committed to a clear goal while being surrounded by your teammates, which are often our friends, in a highly committed and driven environment. I'm kind of laughing because if people on this call know what I'm talking about, then you know that this is a very intense experience. There's a reason why people say things like, it's not the medals or the banners that I miss. It's the connection, it's the people. And those are the things I still have with me today. I can honestly tell you that I have yet to have another team experience like playing and or coaching a team sport. So with this in mind, it makes sense that again, when we leave sport, we can end up feeling a little lost and like we're heading out into this world unknown with very little guidance and or direction. And what I want to say is that it's okay to feel this way. And it's okay to be a little bit lost. In fact, I would suggest to you that this might even be a good thing. Right now, there is such a push for athletes to get involved in coaching. And while my research supports this, and secretly, I want everyone on this call to get involved as a coach, I do think that taking time away is a necessary part of ensuring that you stay in the game for the long run. Of course, this is personal, and not everyone is going to need time off. But for any of you who might be doubting this need to refuel and take time off, please seriously consider how that might be exactly what you need. When I finished playing volleyball, I didn't want to play it, I didn't want to watch it, and I didn't want to be around it, but I wanted to stay active. So I rekindled my relationship with my other sport love, basketball, and I joined a senior women's basketball league. I also reinvented working out. I no longer needed to work out to train my body like a machine. I could actually enjoy exercising in a way that I hadn't before. I worked in business, a sector of the economy that had nothing to do with my fancy science degree, and I clearly didn't take the advice of my fourth year sport ethics prof to investigate academia. But I also found that it was my experiences in sport that helped me the most with this transition. And I know Jana started us off today with talking about this, and I want to echo that. I leveraged my drive and my commitment, my work ethic, and my ability to create relationships with people to thrive in my new world. And in the span of less than 1 year, I was promoted to an operations manager within my business. I was succeeding in every sense of the word. But life is a funny thing. And although I didn't know it at the time, my career in business would be short-lived. One thing that also really helps with transition is support. It took my leaving sport to start doing therapy, and I honestly wish I would have done it sooner. It's my belief that had I gone to therapy sooner, I would have been less shut down as an athlete. I would have performed better. I might have actually finished my 5th year of eligibility, and ultimately I would have been a better Alix. If I could go back and do it all again, that's the one thing that I would change. I can't emphasize enough how important and healthy it is to get some perspective and to find people that will challenge the way you're thinking. Yes, family and friends can be a crucial part of your support team, but getting help from a professional who has a large toolbox to choose from is absolutely crucial. One helpful tool that has recently been added to my toolbox is a framer. A framer is a tool that's usually used when framing doorways and windows and so on. But what I'm using it for is to reframe some of my taken for granted assumptions about myself, about life, and about sport. And so I'm going to extend this tool to you and invite you all to reframe the end of your athlete career as the beginning of something new. To return to my story, even when I was having success in my work life, there was something nagging at me. And that was, I wasn't really passionate about what I was doing there. Respectfully, I didn't care about the products that I was selling, and I wasn't fully invested in the mission of the business. There was something missing for me. So I followed up with that 4th year sport ethics prof who paved a way for me into academia, and I haven't left since. If you read my bio, then you know my story. You know that I'm a current coach student who works as a coach and who studies as a researcher. And you know that I'm curiously passionate and dedicated to making sport a better space for everyone. So even though I was an athlete who took time to be lost, by the way, I eventually returned to sport when the time was right. The end of my athlete career was not the end of my involvement in sport. I will end with a quote from one of my favorite all-time coaches, Jill Ellis. If you watch this interview with Jill, when she makes the statement, she also talks about finding new mountains to conquer and how as we reach the summit of these mountains, there's less and less space. It's crowded up there and there isn't room for everyone. So it becomes important for you to be clear on your purpose for being there. The reality is, when it comes to sport, there are many mountains to climb. As I said at the beginning, right now, we know that we are struggling to keep girls in sport, and this has a direct impact on having women in sport leadership. Former athletes, like some of you, are being identified as the most important and critical population for us to engage with if we want to continue seeing women in sport leadership. The reality is that sport leadership remains a space that is structurally challenging for women to exist within. And it's going to take conferences like these and a significant movement of resistance for us to change this structure. So when it comes time for you to transition in sport, please honor where you're at. And when you're ready, please ask yourself, what mountains will you climb next? Thank you so much, everyone. It's been a pleasure to be with you today.
Incredible presentation. Thank you so much for that. So we have another question from Bryn. She's an athlete who will be finishing her youth sports athletic career soon. Her question is, what are proactive steps she can take to prepare herself for the transition from on-field to off-field?
Yeah, hey, Bryn, what a great question. There are so many different things that you can take, but again, my perspective and sort of my insight on this would be to start asking some of those questions that I asked today. So taking some time to sit with yourself and to reflect and really critically dedicating time. So investing in yourself, like I think I mentioned that's never ever going to be a negative thing. So take time to sort of ask yourself some questions. If you're having a hard time coming up with some of those questions, do you have folks around you who can maybe ask you questions and help probe you? Maybe you're someone like me who prefers to let's have this conversation in person rather than reflecting. So I would say that those, again, are things that you can do as well. Start investing in you, start doing your work, and start getting clear on what you really care about. When you're out of season, what are you spending your time doing? Are you volunteering? Are you maybe doing research in a lab if that's what you want to do? Are you going into the community and coaching? Are you taking your officiating license? Are you doing the kinds of things that you maybe eventually want to do one day? And if anything, please take time to actually develop some of those things. So again, try it out. Maybe you're not entirely sure. Maybe you think, I'm not sure if officiating is for me. Spend a summer doing it. Give it a shot. See what happens, right? Maybe next summer you'll be coaching. Give it a shot. Get out there and actually do some things. And also, there's amazing women around you. I don't know what school you're at, but try having a conversation maybe with someone who's in your department. Hey, so-and-so, I noticed that you're doing this. Or, hey, how did you get into coaching? Have some conversations, become a bit of a researcher and do some of your own sort of investigating, if you will. So again, invest in yourself, start reflecting, start asking yourself some of those important questions that I've shared today. Start actually getting out there and getting experience and trying some different hats on and ask around. That's what I would say, Bryn.
Awesome. I think we have time for one more question. And my question was there any time from your transition from athlete to coach that you felt unsure of yourself, that you didn't belong in the coaching world?
Oh, that's a loaded question. Thank you, Heather, for asking that question. I really appreciate it. And maybe I'm going to give an answer that is unpopular or that people don't agree with, but I still question at times. I still sit there and I look at myself and I go, should I be here? Is this where I'm supposed to be? I get asked all the time, like, so do you want to be a researcher or do you want to be a coach? Right? And I'm like, well, I want to do both. Well, but really, the world really wants, again, this is an example of what the world does to us, right? So when we're an athlete, it narrows our focus. Same thing, the world is telling me, you got to narrow your focus, Alex. You got to pick one. You can't do one or the other, which I so far have been able to resist. Maybe I need to reframe what coaching looks like. Maybe I'll always be an assistant coach and that's okay. I didn't say this, but I actually right now I'm currently going to be the head coach for the Canada Summer Games team for Winnipeg, Manitoba. So that's from my home province. So I am still coaching. I mean, I love it so much. It doesn't matter how many papers I write or publish or how many, projects I take on. Like, there just is nothing like going on a journey with a group of athletes and getting invested. So I honestly think that I'm going to stay here as much as I can. But I do question myself. And again, that's where your support system can really come into play. I have a big family. I'm one of 5 kids. I've got a great group of people around me telling me you can do this. I have an awesome partner who tells me on the regular that I can do this. And I've got great allies in my world of women in sport who are constantly telling me that I can do this. So, as long as that fire is still lit, which if people know me, I'm a pretty passionate person. I'm pretty fired up about what I do. Then it's going to be pretty hard to keep me out of coaching. So I hope that answered your question, Heather. It's a journey. We're all on it.
100%. Well, congratulations on your new coaching position. That's very exciting.
Thank you.
And thank you so much, Alix, for sharing your experiences and knowledge with us. I loved your presentation. I loved your points on how athletics often trumps our identities and how we need to find ourselves, and how sometimes we need other people's help to find ourselves as well in our passions. I think those are really incredible points. And thank you for taking the time to present all this with us.
Yeah, thank you all for being here. And thank you so much, Heather, for leading me today.
Of course. And everyone, now you can exit and go to the next sessions button to click on the next live event, which begins at 1:50. Thank you, everyone, again. And thank you, Alix.
Thanks.